So apparently Great Britain just finished having their discussion about the Stop Killing Games, their portion of it separate from the EU. I did make a video a while back discussing this particular topic because I felt that the things that were being asked for were a little bit of an overreach. And I suggested some things that I suggested a solution to the problem that I felt was where things needed to be. And surprisingly, the response from at least the government in Great Britain seems to be exactly what I called for in my last video. The Stop Killing Games movement was an attempt to try to force video game developers to produce games in a very specific way. And while, in theory, it sounds like that's a really amazing thing to do for gamers, and yeah, it is. As somebody who is obviously an American who leans more, I don't believe in complete free market capitalism because, that the system we have here in America gets exploited like crazy. But I lean more towards a free market solution rather than a heavily government regulated solution in most cases. So what am I trying to say with this video? What I called for back when this whole thing first came out, I said that setting up rules for how developers will develop their video games was heavy-handed, it was unreasonable, and the reason for that is obvious. If you're a game developer, you don't want those rules imposed upon you. It makes your life harder. It forces you to develop your game in a very specific way that you may not want to. And whether we as the customers agree with the way that the developers want to develop their games, that's irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. I believe that people should be free to offer the product that they want to offer in the manner in which they want to offer it, and we as the customers are free to either participate in that or not. So the problem has always been, at least from my perspective, the lack of information and the lack of clarity in what exactly it is that you're purchasing, because these developers and the platforms that provide these games that the developers make have traditionally done a very bad job at making it very clear that you could lose access to these games at any time. If you are like most of my library, I mean, almost all of my library is on Steam. I have dozens of games on Steam. And if Steam decided tomorrow to just shut down their servers, all those games and the thousands of dollars that I've spent on those video games over the years are just completely gone, because that's just the way that Steam works. And the issue has always been that people don't really understand that that's how it works, not that that's the way that it works. You as the customer may not like the way that Steam does their sales of video games and things like that, but you don't have a right to tell them they can't do it that way. What you do have a right to do is say, you will tell me exactly what the process is here. You will inform me every time I make a purchase that, hey, this is just a reminder, you're paying money for access to this game. You do not own this game. And companies have a right to do that. They have a right to say, I don't want to sell you this game and give ownership of this game to you. I want to sell you a license to play this game, and I reserve the right to remove that at any time. And you as the customer have the right to have access to that information and understand that, yes, this is the way that this works. And then at that point, you make a decision as to whether you want to engage in that transaction or say, no, I would rather own a game rather than paying for access to it. So I'm just going to forego this now. Now, the argument against that is that all games are distributed that way now, which means that you'll never own a video game. And while, yes, that is absolutely the truth, you as the customer still have the choice to either participate in that system or not. And where you and I, if you're on the other side of people who want to force developers to provide all these solutions to things, this is where you and I have a fundamental philosophical difference in the way that things should be handled. Because I believe in freedom of choice as much as is reasonable and as much as is possible in a given society. So, for example, while you as the customer may want to have access to a video game, you may want it to be something that you can own, there is no fundamental harm that comes to you from being unable to own a video game. right? So in our life, we have government, and the purpose of that government is to prevent harm from being done to the citizens by other people, right? That's one of the main things that the government is there to do, to prevent you from coming upon financial harm because of, companies taking advantage of you in a criminal way. Like they're actively trying to bring about harm, or they accidentally do something and it costs you money and that company needs to be held responsible. Preventing physical harm in the form of, laws against physical violence and all of those kinds of things, right? That's what the government is supposed to be there for. And the way that laws should be, and unfortunately our modern society has allowed the law to just go way out of scope, laws are supposed to be there to prevent harm from coming to you. We've allowed ourselves to become far too overregulated, and that's just a massive problem, and it's not going to go away. But you try to push back against that as much as you can. So when it comes to something like the Stop Killing Games movement, while I understand the sentiment, and to some degree I agree that ownership of video games, well, to a large extent, I agree that ownership of video games is something that we should have access to. I agree with you in the principle. I disagree with the idea that the solution to that should come from the government forcing companies to build their games in a specific way. The correct way, in my opinion, the only correct way to handle this situation is to provide consumers with all the information possible about the situation. And in this case, it is that you're not paying to own this game, you're paying for access to the game, and the company reserves the right to remove that at any time. That's the only way that you can handle this situation, because as much as you don't want to hear it, it's on you as the customer to make the change happen yourself by not participating in that system. The only reason why these companies are able to continue getting away with this is because people are too weak-willed to say, you know what, I don't want this video game bad enough to spend all this money on it and have it taken away. So until you come at me with an option for ownership, I'm not participating in your system. The reality here is it's not on the government to force companies to provide games in the way that you would like them to provide it. It's on you to not participate in the system until they do. And this is where we start running into these massive problems, because so many problems in our society come from the fact that the population in general just either doesn't pay attention, right? They don't realize what they're getting into. And I think that the laws need to be adjusted to force companies. That's something that companies should be forced to do, to make it super obvious so that you can't miss what you're actually getting yourself into. I agree with that. But people don't have the will to say, you know what, I really want to play this game, but if I can't own it, I'm not going to buy it. There's too many people who can't find the willpower to resist that. And that's your problem, not the video game developer's problem. I know you don't want to hear that, but that's the truth. If the gaming community at large just stopped paying for these things and said, no, we're not buying any more video games from you motherfuckers until you start offering ownership options, that is the correct way to handle the situation. Because now, instead of using force to make companies do this certain thing a certain way, you're using the market itself to force the companies to say, well, if we want to make any money, we have to offer the option this way. That's the way you handle these situations. You start boycotts. You start taking away their money by not participating in their systems, and then they have no option but to either shut down or change their system. But the problem is that we as gamers tend to be very addictive, and we find games that we really love, and we start making decisions based off of how we feel about a video game rather than what the right financial decision is based off of the circumstances that we have. And you don't find the willpower to just say, no, I don't want to participate in this. Me personally, I have price limits on what I'm willing to pay for, and I wait for deals to come out and things like that, because I understand that these games can be taken away at any time. I'm fully aware of that every time I make a purchase. And so because of that, I will not spend, $60, $70, $80 on a video game. Even with Arc Raiders, I decided, you know what? They're charging me $40, and then on top of this, I have to pay for all of these fucking microtransactions that they want you to do. And it's just like, I'm sorry, that's too much of an investment for me for something that they could take away at any time. It's just, I have solid limits on what I'm willing to spend on these video games, because I don't own them, and I know that I don't own them. And that's what you as the consumer need to be doing. Now, I know there's a lot of you that are going to disagree with me. Your fundamental position is that the government should step in and should force these things to happen. And This is a fundamental difference in the philosophy of how we see the world. You and I are never going to agree on this because I believe that people should be as free as possible up until the point where they start harming you. And I'm sorry, I disagree with the idea that selling the video games in the format that they sell them is harming you. The part that's harming you is that they're not being honest about what it is that they're selling you. And if the EU and Britain and all of that stuff come out with regulations that require them to do a pop-up that says, hey, this is what you're getting, that is as far as the government should ever go, in my opinion. And I'm sorry, I know that some of you are going to disagree. You want the heavy-handed approach. But my rebuttal to you is that there are things in your life that you like to do a certain way. And if somebody came in and tried to tell you you couldn't do that anymore because we just decided this is the way it should be, you wouldn't like it if they did that to you. And yeah, these are big multi-billion-dollar corporations, but a principle is a principle regardless of who you're applying that principle to. And I'm not here to defend the gaming industry. I'm here to defend a principle. And the principle is people and companies and organizations and whatever should be free to operate however they want up until the point that they're actively harming you. And that's where the government steps in. And they should only step in to address the harm, not people's personal preferences, companies' personal preferences, or any of that stuff. Okay, so I think that the way that the UK government is handling the Stop Killing Games movement is proportionally appropriate to what needs to happen to fix the problem. And the problem is people being uninformed about what they're getting into. The problem is not the fact that these companies offer their games in the way that they do. The way you solve that issue is by not participating in the process and telling them, if you want my money, you're going to give me ownership. And that requires you to actually not buy video games. And I'm sorry that that's the way that it is, but that is the right way to handle it. So that's all I wanted to say. I hope all of that made some kind of sense. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to help us reach 10,000 subscribers. If you'd like to support my channel, I do have PayPal and Patreon links, as well as the thanks button in the video or just below the video itself. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you for the next one.